There's no denying that 2020 will forever be remembered as the year of COVID-19. The entire world was changed seemingly at the flip of a switch. And while there were obviously very serious real-world implications that have taken place, the impact has also been astronomical to the sports world, including America's favorite league, the NFL, and one of its cornerstone franchises. Ahead of the 2020 season, pretty much every talking head in sports media was predicting a wacky season, particularly after the news broke that the NFL was not going to be following in the footsteps of the NBA, which had a very successful COVID-19 bubble strategy, a tactic that effectively eliminated all of the exposure that credentialed media members, team officials, referees, players, and coaches could have to the virus. But because of the scale at which the NFL operates, both in terms of how many players and coaches are on a roster in comparison to the NBA, as well as the fact that it had its entire season to play, it would have been a much bigger ask to get 55 guys plus the extended rosters all bubbled up in one or even two cities. This presented a bevy of logistical challenges that the NFL decided were not worth facing. So instead, the league went with its traditional formatting, of course with some added COVID-19 protocols. This strategy has netted some mixed results. The league was lucky not to have to cancel any games, at least through 13 weeks of play. But it has been up to its eyeballs in positive tests to the point that a number of games have had to be rescheduled. And because they don't want to screw up the flow of the season by extending it any further than it needs to be, we have ended up with all sorts of oddities. I mean, think about it. Can you imagine the confusion when an NFL historian looks back at this season and sees all the randomly slotted games? What about the spike in players who played 14 or 15 games despite not having suffered a physical injury? Who knows what other oddities we will encounter before this whole deal is over? Hopefully nothing too crazy, but that being said, there is one team in the NFL who is particularly sick of dealing with the side effects of the NFL's COVID-19 protocol. A squad that just so happens to look like one of the league's top teams this year, despite not having come into the season as a particularly sexy pick for our Super Bowl run. And that team, my friends, is the one and only Pittsburgh Steelers. Perhaps the worst of these COVID-19 related struggles for Pittsburgh got started early. After all, the Steelers were pretty much the first team to be secondarily impacted by COVID-19, meaning that even though the positive tests were not coming out of their locker room, the Steelers still found themselves at the mercy of the forced COVID-19 flex schedule. This all started back in Week 4, while the NFL's COVID-19 protocols were all still somewhat experimental, and the league was trying to sort out the best way to keep players and coaches healthy without derailing the entire season. Out of this Week 4 matchup, the Tennessee Titans found themselves in the midst of a corona-induced whirlwind following positive COVID-19 tests from 11 different players. This included the team's starting nose tackle Daquan Jones, a linebacker Kamale Correa, long snapper Bo Brinkley, and then practice squad tight end Tommy Hudson. Oh, and there were 5 team personnel members who tested positive as well. In part because this was the first major outbreak, so the league was still operating with a higher degree of caution, the NFL decided to postpone the game until Week 6, which was a good idea from a safety perspective. But if you ask the Steelers, they were none too pleased about this strategy, because that forced the team to take its much-coveted bye week during Week 4, which is very early in the season, something that has long been proven to be a disadvantage in the NFL. Suddenly, a team that is looking like it could make a deep playoff run will be going into the postseason not having taken a proper week off since early October, unless they can secure a lone first-round bye this season. Titans coach Mike Vrabel was quick to dispel the notion that Tennessee had been negligent in the days and weeks preceding the game, telling ESPN the following: "I know there's going to be a lot of questions about the game and about who's to blame and where it started. Nobody's to blame. We're in a pandemic. This is a very unfortunate situation, but one we're confident that we will be able to handle safely with the football team and the players' best interest in mind." But after seeing how the rest of that situation continued to play out, maybe Vrabel was really just getting out in front of it, hoping that no one was going to look too closely at what Tennessee was up to. Because on September 30th and the days leading up to the game with Pittsburgh, at least 2 groups of Tennessee Titans players were photographed conducting an illegal practice. One group of reportedly a dozen players were caught on the football field at Montgomery Bell Academy, a local private high school, and the other a smaller group at Belmont University's baseball field. And this all took place just 1 day after league officials ordered the team to halt all in-person activities and to make sure players remain distant from one another until further notice, in an effort to curb the organization's COVID outbreak. Oh, and to have been a fly on the wall in Roger Goodell's office when that report came in. According to Yahoo Sports, one source said that the league's sanctions against the Titans were likely not a matter of it, but when and how severe, and that the NFL and union jointly believe that the franchise violated COVID-19 safety protocols before and during Week 4. Eventually, the when and how severe were answered when on October 25th, it was announced that the league had fined the organization $350,000 for their violations, which seemed like a slap on the wrist when you consider the lengths to which the players went to break the rules in the first place. But I digress. Anyway, back to the Steelers. Interestingly, although Pittsburgh has been at the mercy of COVID-19 all season, it is actually not because the team itself has had all that many outbreaks. Ahead of a matchup with the Baltimore Ravens in Week 12, the team did lose two of its positional coaches in quarterbacks coach Matt Canada and special teams coach Danny Smith, as well as defensive end Stephon Tuitt, defensive lineman Isaiah Buggs, and two of the team's offensive linemen Gerald Hawkins and Kevin Dotson. Not to mention the loss of one of its top players in James Conner, the team's starting running back. Fortunately for the Steelers, there has been a fair amount of continuity on the coaching staff under the Mike Tomlin regime, and the team is notoriously deep at the skill positions. So the Steelers conveniently took one of their first backups in Benny Snell, a fairly dynamic running back out of the University of Kentucky, and were able to slot him in rather seamlessly. Of course, some credit there is due to the coaching staff and Big Ben Roethlisberger for keeping that offense moving. But the team's most important loss was at what many consider to be one of the most replaceable positions in football, running back. And when you compare it to the importance of missing someone at, the quarterback position, like the Ravens who announced in the days leading up to that game, and they were going to be without the league's reigning MVP, Lamar Jackson, under center. But just because they caught a little bit of a break against the Ravens, at least in terms of the specific personnel that both teams were missing, the fact of the matter is the Pittsburgh Steelers have been getting absolutely screwed all year. And not just because they were losing key players like Conner, but more so because they have found themselves at the mercy of a number of different externalities, many of which center around opposing teams' incompetence when it comes to managing the COVID-19 situations in their own locker rooms, as it has forced them to adjust and readjust their schedule a number of times. Take, for example, their schedule between weeks 12 and 14. Because their Week 12 contest against the Ravens was forced to move to Wednesday, December 2nd, as a result of the Ravens' inability to control their own COVID outbreak, the Steelers were forced to endure a grueling 12-day stretch during which they had to play 3 games against Baltimore, Washington, and Buffalo. It's probably not a coincidence that their first loss of the season came 1 week after that Wednesday afternoon game against the Ravens. You'd have to think that the scheduling changes had something to do with their Week 13 Monday night home loss to the mediocre Washington football team, as they were coming off of just 4 days of rest entering that contest. These are just some of the hurdles that I am sure Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin considers to be the unnecessary obstacles for the team to clear. The team did have one big-time internal scare in the middle of November, when the undefeated Steelers had to put the franchise's longtime quarterback on the COVID-19 reserve list. And after seeing how the 2019 season went, during which Ben Roethlisberger was out for pretty much the entire year after suffering an elbow injury, it should come as no surprise that the team was terrified by the thought of losing its star for even 1 week. Even Ben himself was nervous after having potentially been exposed to the virus, he explained to Steelers.com. "You were always a little nervous about it. I wore a mask when I was at home. If we went anywhere in the car, I wore a mask. The family got tested every day. I got tested every day. You were always nervous. My wife said I don't care if I get it. I don't want our kids to get it. You always care more about your kids. We have been as safe as we possibly can at home." Fortunately, Roethlisberger never ended up even testing positive for the virus, even though he had reportedly had exposure to it. So he was ultimately able to play in the team's upcoming game. But his entire routine and preparation was disrupted because any player that is on the COVID-19 list, even without having tested positive, is required to quarantine themselves, meaning that Ben missed an entire week's worth of practice, including the team's walkthrough, during which they would typically roll out the team strategy for the game. Thanks to modern technology, Ben was able to participate virtually at least, but I would be hard-pressed to believe that even a seasoned veteran like Roethlisberger did not end up losing out on a couple of key bits of information and repetitions by going through the process virtually. Ben even admitted to this struggle ahead of the team's game against Cincinnati, saying the following: "As Coach Tomlin would say, the in-helmet perspective, if you are not out there, at least you can hear it and be a part of it. It was definitely different. I watched every play of practice, but you can watch on your iPad at home, so you don't get to hear all of those things. It was definitely different than anything I have experienced before." All 4 players who were on the COVID-19 list, including Ben ended up being able to play, and the team cruised to a relatively easy victory over a young Bengals team. But these sort of disruptions can take a toll on a team, even if they have a strong veteran core like the Steelers do. It will be interesting to see if, come playoff time, there are any lingering effects on a Steelers team that, as it stands, looks poised to make a run at yet another Lombardi trophy for the proud franchise. Of course, only time will tell. But it should be a dramatic close to an already chaotic season, especially for the Steelers. Which NFL team do you think is getting screwed the most by the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps us out a ton and we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.